On today's episode, we talk about a tried and true traditional way of heating up troughs or water holders in the wintertime due to our cold Montana climates, but we have a different way of doing that.
Well, the easiest way to take care of your cold water troughs is move to Arizona,
Yeah,
right?
that would do it. Or
That
Texas.
tends to happen, yeah. Um, those things have evolved over the years too, in some really very novel ways. I mean, you can get a heated water bucket that's a 5 gallon bucket,
Yeah.
and we've used those. We have one of those, and it's ready for use in case you get an animal that's hurt. And you need to bring them into the barn. We don't have any water supplies or waterers in the barn per se. So, we've done that, and you've helped me do that, where we've set up a stall or pen for an animal to be confined inside, and they
Yeah.
need a little extra help. And then a 5 gallon bucket, you hang it from their fence and secure it and plug it in. And it keeps that outside that shell warm, and the water doesn't freeze for them. So they've got a steady supply of water. So that's
But
one way. That's a really expensive way. It's
I
doesn't
I was
happen
gonna
very
say a more traditional way though, like the one that I alluded to in the intro is like just regular tank heaters. They're like
often.
a I don't even it's like a wire that's warmed up through electricity, and you normally have a small basket to keep the horse or cow from hitting
When
it
you're
and
think,
burning themselves. But
yeah, you're thinking the floating type. There's those that are kind of round and they
yeah,
float on top, and then they have
yeah,
the basically it's like an element that's just heated through resistance, like you would heat a stove
right.
electric element, or some electric branding iron. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just resistance builds up a little bit of resistance enough that it keeps the water from heating, but not freezing, not too much heat, because you're just wasting electricity and wasting some dollars that way, but just enough to keep that from freezing. And super cold weather, I have seen those struggle to keep up. And you're right.
still had to use a spud bar or an
Yep,
axe to kick
yep,
it open.
yep. And those don't happen very often. I mean, those are extreme where it's 25 below for a while.
Yeah,
But you're right. They have a cage that you can buy to put around those so that it's just not floating there. And you sure don't want to let that tank go empty, because that element touches the bottom. It'll burn a hole right through your tank if it's a
yeah.
plastic or composite type tank. And then if it gets uncovered, too much heat, they'll burn themselves up. So there's some maintenance to them. I mean, you should be checking your water every day anyway, at least once a day minimum. Um, Another one that's similar to that, which is kind of nice, is if you have a tank, and most tanks have a bung on them, you take that plug out, and the element will screw right into that hole and heat from the bottom. It doesn't float, which is nice, but then you got to make sure you turn that away from where your horses are standing, so it's
Yeah.
on the, next to a fence, and they can't kick it, bang it, step on it. And those work pretty well also. But they heat the whole tank. They don't do just an
Right.
area. I mean, it just keeps everything warm. So those are another one. All electric.
The
I
only
I
problem with those two, if I remember correctly, is they do tend to leak more, especially because, like you said, if a horse moves the trough around and all, and that thing gets jiggled a little bit, it does tend to leak out that bung hole a little bit, and you're like, ah, darn it.
well, it could, but that's what, even that, putting Teflon tape in there and
Yeah,
and tightening that thing down. But if you've got something you've used a lot, it can be a little bit loose. So that's why you either pipe dope or Teflon, really build that up and tighten it in there, and usually solves that. But you're right. If they move that tank around and start tipping it over and it comes loose, yeah, you can start damaging that stuff, especially if they're starting to paw on it, because guess what? Now they don't have any water.
right.
If they tip it over, you better hope it comes unplugged, because you'll probably burn that element up. It can't keep up. So, and they do come on and off based on the water temperature. If it warms up, usually they won't turn on. They're thermostatically controlled for the most part. Not all of them, but most of them are. Um, we've never had a water that was permanent, that took electricity to keep it warm. We
No.
Water and electricity. I still don't like these floating type and the plug-in type with the elements, because water and electricity don't mix too well anyway, and then horses really don't mix.
Yeah.
So, you'll, if there's a little bit of a shock in there or starts to get some kind of a failure, and that water's got a tiny bit of a shock, those horses won't drink. And I've known of, I've never seen it, but I've known of people that have said, oh yeah, our water, which was wired that way with elements already in it, and they just drink, shorted out, and it was just a little bit of electricity. You couldn't really tell. Those horses stuck their nose in the water because it had a pool of water, and got shocked, and they would stand there and they were losing weight quickly, not feeling good, and they couldn't figure out what was going on while they were getting shocked. So, I mean, they can actually keep them from drinking if it doesn't kill them, if it isn't a big deal, and
Right.
electrocute them. So we've never used those. We just stayed away from those things. I would rather pack water
Yeah.
and break ice than use one of those type of waterers.
So now the next question would be, do we still use those? Because at the time we did used to. Do we still use them on the ranch?
I don't so much anymore. I mean, if I had to, I would.
Yeah.
And probably the application would be in wintertime. Let's
I'm
say I
thinking
got
like, yeah,
during
temporary
calving.
situation
Yeah,
where they're
very
in the
temporary.
middle,
Yep.
maybe like in the round corral where you can't get water to directly there. Because now we have those posts. That's
Right.
one of the
What we have
biggest things
watering
we've got.
posts, yeah, which are really nice. They don't take any electricity. They work off of water pressure and then a valve that works like a hydrant. So that
Yeah.
when the water's not being demanded, it drains all the way back down below the frost line. You could put a tank up, and I usually do this for the heifers when we calve, and I have to bring them in close. I don't have a water in that pen that they would use because a lot of them are they're not focusing on that water anyway. So I tend to put open water out there for them, and I'm usually chopping the water. It's from one night to the next morning. You might get an inch of ice or inch and a half of ice, and it's easiest to just chop it out, pull it out, and refill a little bit of water, freshen it up, or let them drink it down. So, and it warms up in the daytime enough that it's not freezing too much, but you're checking it day and night on those, and just managing that way because it's easier. I'm not having to use those, but I would in some very specific areas where I don't have an automatic water like the ones we use, and I need to keep some animal up close and they need water. Certainly, I'd use that. I'd put it in there.
Well, then the two bigger troughs that help with the pastures for anywhere a cow or a horse might be hanging out, they've got running water the whole time. So
Yeah.
that really doesn't have any issues in terms of freezing because the water is constantly running. And if it does freeze, it's because it's like last year, it was super cold. So all you have to do is break it up enough to get some good openings, and then it'll stay just fine as long as you, like you said, check once, maybe twice a day.
Yeah, the water still flows, but it just builds up kind of a cone
Yeah.
of ice around it because it still keeps it thawed out and just drops down into the tank, but it will freeze around that where an animal can't get to it. So yeah, it's when you got to chop it up and peel it out. And that's big deal. That's just chores. That's what you do. Doesn't worry about the water. It still flows. It's just whether they
Right.
get to it or it's flowing underneath of it.
So far, I know we had somebody ask about the post recently, the drinking post, because we shared a small video on that, the production of it for summer 2022, and then this summer finishing it up. How well have those drinking posts been working? Are they I guess I should ask, how many winters have they made it through so far and been doing okay?
We are approaching 10 years, and I've
Okay.
replaced one valve that I don't know that I really needed to replace it. Um, and that I've replaced some paddles because paddles get broken,
Yeah.
and they've improved the design on a paddle and a bowl. And I
Okay.
put that in the newest one that we put in a year ago, and used last winter, and I've used all summer, and oh, it made a difference in that, managing that water. It takes
Yeah.
time away to check water, especially in the
Right.
summertime. Then you dump water, it gets, a lot of moss and algae in it. So you're dumping that water, freshening it up. This time now with this extra post we got out there feeding two separate pastures, it's in a fence line. And I think it shows on that video where, you're building the fence around it over the top of
Right.
it. So each side can water from it. It has made all the difference. I mean, you check it, you make sure they're drinking and they're in good shape. And other than that, it's fresh water all the time. So some of those were 9 years and this one's a year. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, I believe. and I really like them. The only problem with them in the winter is if you have a colt, meaning a weanling, who has too
A
much time on
baby.
their hands, babies, they'll start playing with that stupid paddle, and because they've learned how to get the water, but they'll play
Yeah.
with it for something to do, and they might start building up ice around it, and then it'll
Yeah.
freeze. And so
Which
then you
we've
got to
had to
go and,
fix that before.
yep, had to fix that before. But that's really about the only time we've ever had an issue.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is water is important. Find the best, most efficient way to make sure it gets provided to the animals without having any other additional issues. So I felt like you
I
had a
was going to
conver
say it's okay to use electricity to get the water to it, but try
yeah.
not to heat it with it. It's
Yeah.
less than optimal.
It's always a concern. So with that, we'll take that conversation and put it out to pasture.